Not everyone can get up every day and look for ways to piss people off. But here at GraniteRock.com, we do that almost every day. I can't tell you how many times someone's lost their SHIT and threatened to end us. But we're still here, pissing people off. It's almost like we enjoy it. And we've been doing it since 2006. That's almost 2 decades of news, politics, and opinion, and now podcasts, and we're just getting started. We believe in principles before parties and politicians. We defend free markets and individual liberty, and if that makes you mad, it makes us smile. We're like Grandma after she stopped caring what other people thought. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you. Welcome back to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by GraniteRock.com and Grok Media LLC. My guest is the CEO and president of CompassCare, and he's been on the program before, so welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. It's an honor, as always, to be with you.
Thanks. Well, so I had some information sent my way that we'll get your thoughts on how you think the Trump administration's been doing and all that good stuff, but you had some suggestions for the Attorney General and in particular Kash Patel, the head of the FBI. Why don't you tell us what those are?
Yeah, so I'm very happy that President Trump issued Executive Order 14202, which established the task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias in government and also through private actions of bad actors. And so Pam Bondi, Attorney General Pam Bondi, had an inaugural meeting last week with a tour de force of presidential cabinet members, including Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and also Assistant U.S. Attorney General, incoming Harmeet Dillon. Okay, she is now the person in charge of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And, Kash Patel was also present at this task force meeting. And, this is encouraging to me because previous Attorney General Merrick Garland and his Assistant U.S. Attorney General Kristen Clark refused to prosecute violent crimes against pro-life churches and pregnancy centers like what we've experienced over the last several years. We had a massive, we experienced the most brutal firebombing of all fire bombings in the last several years. The fact that I even have to say that there are multiple fire bombings is crazy. But it was perpetrated by, an Antifa front group known as Jane's Revenge. And Kristen Clark refused to prosecute, Merrick Garland refused to prosecute, the FBI slow-walked it, and in fact moved from slow walking it to actually vilifying pro-life pregnancy centers and engaging in what we found out later to be investigations on the pro-life organizations, the victims, rather than the actual domestic terrorists that are committing these crimes. So I suggested that Pam Bondi ask Kash Patel to deliver all the names of the suspects to her and the Assistant U.S. Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, so that they can indict. Now, I say that they should deliver the names, that Kash Patel and the FBI should deliver the names of the firebombers to Pam Bondi and Harmeet Dillon, because I am almost confident, they've got to know who these people are. We know that the FBI has the greatest, law enforcement kind of technological resources at their fingertips. If an abortion clinic were attacked, they would know exactly who this person was and have them in custody within hours. And the FBI didn't even bother to look at our video surveillance for 5 weeks. Okay, our video surveillance of the firebombing, multiple perpetrators, Molotov cocktails. It was a bona fide pro-abortion crystal knocked. And I said this was going to happen. I predicted this would happen all across the country, and it continued to happen. We had now 500 attacks on pro-life churches and pregnancy centers since 2022. And what did the Biden administration's DOJ and FBI do? They joined the attacks. They were complicit in the attacks. Biden himself signed executive orders to initiate a reproductive health task force and look into the, quote, fraudulent practices of pregnancy centers. Are you kidding me? We're the ones being attacked. We're the ones saying, look, the abortion industry is the one committing the fraud. The abortion industry is the one telling women that, chemical abortion is safer than Tylenol, when we now know that 1 in 9 women who start the chemical abortion process wind up in the emergency room. How many people who take Tylenol end up in the emergency room? I mean, so this is what we're dealing with. We've got Attorney General in New York State, Letitia James, engaging in lawfare against us. We've got New York Governor engaging in weaponizing legislation against us. And they're all using the same language as Marxist Antifa, communist, Russian-originated movement that's a multinational insurgency that is basically attempting to piggyback off of left-wing pet issues or projects like abortion, like transgenderism, like environmentalism, like any kind of anti-capitalistic notion, like the Tesla protests coming that have been happening. All the same people. And so I'm saying, look, yes, it's great. We would love it. We'd love nothing more than to see our attackers identified, indicted, and imprisoned. Okay, but we need to make sure that we're seeing the bigger picture here. The reason why they attacked us, and it was a coordinated and very well-funded hit job, not just on CompassCare in Buffalo, but all across the country. We need to recognize that this was an opportunity that Antifa used to foment left-wing progressives to destabilize the current our constitutional rule of law in America. This is what the FBI and the DOJ need to be very concerned about. There is a clear and present danger to the rule of law in America, and the stated purpose of Antifa is to dismantle and destroy the current global nation-state system to pave the way for a global communism. Now, the bulwark of the nation-state system is the United States of America and our economy. And the two things that uphold the global nation-state system is the Judeo-Christian moral framework and the free market. Okay, and so those two things are attempting to attack, and that's why they attacked pro-life Christians, and that's why President Trump established the task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias in America. It's a real thing. Persecution is happening. We've been shouting it from the rooftops, but we are so, as Americans, so used to a Judeo-Christian framework governing our political policies that we just don't think about persecution happening to Christians in America. It's just not part of our daily experience. But given what the Biden administration did and how they weaponized the DOJ and the FBI and the DHS and the DOD against pro-life Christians, it was very disconcerting and a massive wake-up call. So to focus on the attacks on pro-lifers is a good thing. But I think we need to take it a step further and say, okay, who are the ringleaders? And I think if you can get to the bottom of the attacks on CompassCare's, the firebombing of CompassCare in 2022, those people will give us some information as to who the leadership is in the Antifa movement, the Antifa insurgency in the United States. You've got activity happening in Portland, activity happening in Buffalo, activity happening in Madison, Wisconsin, activity happening in New York City. These are all hubs for pro-abortion, transgender, eco-terrorist Antifa activity. So look at the bigger picture. I would say, yes, deliver all this content to Kash Patel, deliver the names to Pam Bondi and Assistant U.S. Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, but don't lose sight of the bigger picture. Understand that attacks on pro-life Christians are an attack on the Judeo-Christian moral framework because of what we believe in about the rule of law, the basic belief that drives the constitutional rule of law in America is the sacrosanct nature of the human person. We believe that we are endowed by our Creator, not our government, with certain inalienable rights, the first of which, the right upon which all other rights are predicated, is the right to life. Okay, so we if you can destroy that presumption of the sacrosanct nature of the human person, it allows the government to initiate policies of greater control. And the reason why the pro-abortion politicians in charge of the Democrat Party are so intent on promoting abortion is not because they're interested in women's rights. It's not because they're interested in women's access to medical care. It's not because they're interested in any of that. They don't care about abortion other than what it gives them. Abortion gives them power, and ultimate power is the ability to decide who lives and who dies. Who is protected under law. And to vest the government with any government with the power to decide which humans qualify for protection under the law and which ones do not, we can no longer say that this is a free democracy where justice is truly blind. The concepts of equality and freedom and these kinds of things are just words that politicians use to manipulate the emotions of the masses for their own political gain. This is what's happening in America, and this is what needs to stop. And we see the spark of this Maoist prairie fire happening at locations like pro-life Christian pregnancy centers. It's more than just a grassroots, disgruntled group of people that are unhappy that they lost the right to abortion, which they didn't, by the way. This is a very intentional and targeted, well-funded process for undermining the constitutional rule of law. And I think the FBI and the DOJ need to keep their eye on the ball and use these injustices and this domestic terror that's targeting us as in context for the larger Antifa movement. Now, in 2017, during the first Trump administration, it was leaked to the Politico that the FBI did consider Antifa activity domestic terrorism. And by the way, their acts against us do qualify for domestic terrorism. And Harmeet Dillon came out in an interview with Glenn Beck just a couple of days ago. This is the Assistant U.S. Attorney General under Pam Bondi. She came out just a couple of days ago on an interview with Glenn Beck saying she is basically promising to prosecute all these activities, this terror activity against pro-life organizations and churches. Under the FACE Act, which is very interesting. You know about the FACE Act. The FACE Act was the bill called, it's an acronym, which stands for Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. And this was the bill that was passed and signed into law by President Clinton back in 1994, specifically designed to quell pro-life speech in and around abortion clinics, okay? And that's exactly how it's been used since then. And we were saying, look, since we've been attacked, the DOJ and the FBI have not been enforcing the law equally according to the 14th Amendment when it comes to attacks on peaceful pro-life people. In fact, they've been weaponizing the FACE Act against pro-life people during that time, unjustly sending 23 to 27 pro-life people to federal prison. And so thankfully Trump pardoned those people and got them out. Nevertheless, Harmeet Dillon is saying, we're going to use the FACE Act to prosecute pro-abortion criminals. It's not fair for the DOJ and the FBI to just weaponize the FACE Act against politically disfavored pro-lifers. We're going to apply the law equally. We're going to use it to indict and imprison these domestic terrorists, these pro-abortion domestic terrorists attacking churches and pro-life pregnancy centers. That's what Harmeet Dillon committed to a couple days ago on Glenn Beck. That's what Pam Bondi's committed to under Executive Order 14202 with the Task Force to Eradicate Anti-Christian Bias. And look, elections have consequences. Thank God these are good consequences. It looks like there's the dawn of justice is beginning to shed some rays of light in the DOJ and the FBI. So very, very excited to see these things happening. But I want to say, look, FBI Director Kash Patel delivered those names of the suspects of our firebombers to U.S. Attorney General, Assistant U.S. Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, but also investigate. Initiated a nationwide investigation through the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security with respect to pro-abortion Antifa, now manifesting itself in these Tesla protests. These people are the same people. And then I think Pam Bondi and her team should review my 9-point plan to protect women and children from abortion, fraud, and injury. Part of that, and here's the irony. I just want to say, the crimes that these Antifa people are committing are crimes. You can't firebomb somebody. You can't. Arson is a crime. It's just under murder in the criminal code because it's so dangerous. In fact, 2 firefighters were sent to the hospital, admitted to the hospital, trying to put out the blaze that they started in Buffalo. I think this is a perfect time to repeal the FACE Act. The FACE Act was unconstitutional on its face. But if it's going to be on the books, it needs to be enforced equally. So Harmeet Dillon says it's on the books. It's not our job to decide which laws to enforce, like Merrick Garland said. So we're going to enforce the law equally. That's fine. But I think it's an opportunity now for the legislature to repeal this unconstitutional bill that was specifically targeting pro-life speech. And so I think Chip Roy is on the right track. Congressman Chip Roy has introduced the idea of repealing the FACE Act, which would go a long way in keeping future Democrat administrations from weaponizing that bill against pro-lifers again.
We have a clinic bill like that in New Hampshire that was passed shortly after Massachusetts lost in the courts on a similar bill, and it's still on the books because they refuse to do anything about it because nobody's ever violated it. Nobody's ever tried to prosecute anybody for it, so it just sits there waiting like a hammer to be used against pro-lifers.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you now, you obviously new administration, you wrote a post in 2022 called the 5-Point Plan to prosecute corruption within federal law enforcement. So of course, the FBI is a big place, DHS is a big place. There's a lot of people in there. They're going to try to remove the bad apples. They're going to find people and prosecute them when they leak. But part of your program was, in order for any of this to really work, for us to really get balance with the FACE Act, for us to make sure that the law is equally applied, that we needed to do something about corruption in federal and law enforcement. And so do you think they're making any progress? Do you expect they will?
Well, I don't know how deep the rabbit hole goes, but I know that, federal law enforcement and any law enforcement agency does reflect the beliefs and actions of the leader to a large extent. How the leader manages the resources of law enforcement is an indicator as to the direction that law enforcement will take in actually quelling, the crimes that are being committed out here in the real world. And so you have Merrick Garland, who, was the leader of the DOJ, and, his direct report, FBI out, thankfully gone, then FBI Director Christopher Wray, who obfuscated and honestly were not interested in enforcing the law when it came to those pro-life people who were politically disfavored by the Biden administration. So I think the rabbit hole goes deeper than just the 7th floor of the FBI building. I think it goes into the rank and file. I think you've got many, many years of bureaucratic placement and DEI hiring policies that virtually ensured they would get progressive Democrats into lower level positions. And so, we've got massive corruption throughout law enforcement, federal law enforcement in particular. And I think one of the things that we need to do, that the President Trump needs to do, is begin to assess the constitutionality of federal law enforcement. To what extent does federal law enforcement violate the 10th Amendment? It is the purview of the states to protect its citizens and to enforce the law. And so when you've got FBI agents doing dawn SWAT raids on a peaceful pro-life person, a leader, say like in 2022, in September of 2022, when they put Mark Houck's wife and 7 children under the gun, we've gone way beyond what federal law enforcement was designed to do. Now, I think we do need federal law enforcement to handle interstate and organized crime, but I think part of the interstate organized crime is the abortion industry and the abortion industry's complicity with the sex crime industry. Abortion is the glove that covers the fingerprints of the sex crime industry, and it's the complicity of these pro-abortion politicians that get elected by this multi-million-dollar international conglomerate. So I think we've got to take a step back, take a look at, and I even suggested during the height of the Biden administration that we defund and freeze all funding to the FBI until a thorough external investigation can be done as to the corruption of the FBI and how deep that rabbit hole actually goes. So, sequestering funds to these departments while investigations can be done could be very, very beneficial. I think, though, that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel are doing that work right now. I do think that they are engaging in investigations into FBI corruption and corruption within the DOJ. I think I've even heard that Pam Bondi said, look, if you're not willing to do what's right and to execute the orders as given by the president, as well as Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, then you're going to be found out and you're going to be fired, or you should just leave. So we'll see how serious they are about that. I do think that Pam Bondi is quite serious. I do think Kash Patel is going to be a breath of fresh air after many years of Christopher Wray at the FBI. But again, this is a moment in time where we have to take a step back and say, is it proper, is it appropriate to have 250,000 federal agents, armed federal agents that are willing and able to point their guns at U.S. citizens? That's what we have right now. It's a force that's larger than the Marine Corps, and I think we really need to think about what the constitutionality of federal law enforcement is, and to what extent should we pare that down.
One of the things you mentioned, of course, sex trafficking, which is a huge problem, and with the advent of chemical abortion, obviously it is a lot easier to hide. I wrote a post on Substack the other day called Chemical Coat Hangers. They used to talk about the coat hangers in the back alleys, and I'm like, well, what's the difference between some girl getting chemical abortifacients online and aborting her own baby in her home, and as you said, at least 1 in 10 end up in the hospital? And it just struck me. I'm like, that's the same message. It's last year you actually wrote a piece called about Project Stop, which was a plan to protect women, and you also had some suggestions about dealing with sex trafficking, which is a 7-point plan. Reinstate rapid DNA testing, mandate attorney generals engage in civil investigations, mandate abortionists report. That's a huge problem. In New Hampshire, we've been fighting for years to get any kind of medical record, and the only time you get a medical record is when they end up having to go to a hospital because something went wrong with their abortion. Encourage state and federal legislation, which of course is what I just said, and mandate state and local law. I think overall, where do you think we're going to end up? Can they do something with this?
I think the answer is yes. We're going to make progress. I think we're already making progress. And the reason I say that is because you do have, number one, you have various state attorneys general that are aware of the sex trafficking problem and its connection with abortion and the abuses of women through chemical abortion. These sex traffickers want to keep their quote-unquote product on the street, and so chemical abortion, it becomes a key tool for them to do that. So monitoring how chemical abortion is sold, to monitoring who is purchasing chemical abortion, whether or not it's being purchased more than one time in any given month, monitoring whether or not it's being purchased by men, figuring out who's stockpiling chemical abortion, making sure that, it's a violation of the Mann Act to transport a woman across state lines in order to cover up a sex crime, similar to what happened in Ohio with this 13-year-old rape victim impregnated by her mother's boyfriend, 26-year-old boyfriend. The Biden administration said, "Oh, ain't it awful because this poor girl wasn't able to get an abortion in Ohio." Wait a second, that's the problem. The problem is that the sex offender couldn't cover up the sex crime in Ohio, and they had to travel across state lines to cover up the sex crime, and the abortionist actually, said that actually falsified the record and saying, "Oh, this guy's only 16, he's not 27 or 26. He's an illegal immigrant. He's impregnating a 13-year-old." And the Biden administration is like, "Oh, this is terrible. Look, women need access to abortion care." No, women need access to justice.
Yeah.
I mean, and so you've got the Attorney General in Indiana, the Attorney General in Ohio, the Attorney General in Missouri. You've got Attorneys General all across the United States that are willing to recognize the problem of sex trafficking and its connection to abortion. But you also have Tom Homan, who's the border czar, and he's been given one of 3 directives by President Trump himself. And one of the 3 directives by President Trump was to stop the sex trafficking at the border and go and rescue the 300 to 500,000 children that have been sold into sex slavery in the United States of America. Go find them and go rescue them. That's a tall order, but he's committed to doing that. So I think we've staunched the sex trafficking kind of hemorrhage that's going on across the border, the southern border, and to a certain extent at the northern border. And now it's time to start, focusing on the actual problem within the border, within the borders of the United States, through shoring things up with law enforcement, with the Attorney General's offices, and making sure that they're communicating accurately. But you've got states like New York that are obfuscating, that are getting themselves in the way of justice for women. They're passing laws that make it illegal. In the Biden administration, Joe Biden himself wanted to do this. He wanted to make it illegal for medical professionals to deliver medical records of girls and women that have been trafficked or abused sexually to law enforcement. It would make it virtually impossible for the attorneys general to prosecute and indict these sex criminals because they couldn't get the records from the medical community. Absolutely. Now, New York State, of course, passed that law, making it very difficult. They're looking to shield abortionists, not to shield women who are being abused. Now, I asked this question a year ago when I was at a press conference in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of like-minded legislators. And I said, look, someone's got to ask the question. No one seems to be asking this question. Who was providing the abortions for Jeffrey Epstein's sex crime syndicate in New York City? Well, right? I mean, look, the natural consequence of sexual activity, human sexual activity, is pregnancy. So the sex trafficking industry needs to have access and ready access to an abortion industry that's complicit, that will not provide information to law enforcement about what's going on. And so that's why mifepristone, the chemical abortion drug, is so absolutely essential to the sex trafficking industry. They need to have access, and they don't care whether or not it's safe and effective. We know for a fact now, we've known this for years, that chemical abortion is, as you describe it, a chemical coat hanger. It's just that simple. It causes sepsis, hemorrhaging, death. Really one in you said 1 in 10. I think nearly 1 in 9. I've heard that number too. A study just came out recently. I think late last week, analyzing 860,000 insurance records of women that started the chemical abortion process and wound up in the emergency room. We're talking 1 in 10 at least of women who start the chemical abortion process wind up in the emergency room. And many of the chemical abortion purveyors, 25%, are purveyed across from just sent these drugs in the mail to women without medical oversight. They're just it's absolutely staggering, the violations of law that are happening, not just the violations of state law in pro-life states, but violations of federal law like the Comstock Act. And here's another thing. Pam Bondi, she can actually enforce the Comstock Act if she wanted to, meaning the Comstock Act basically makes it illegal to ship chemical abortion drugs or abortion paraphernalia across U.S. borders or state lines, with a $250,000 fine per violation, with racketeering charges, which is triple damages for anybody that coordinates that or participates in it. And that's physicians, pharmaceutical companies, mail carriers, you name it. We're talking about a massive sting operation that's just waiting to happen that could bankrupt the abortion industry overnight. We're talking about just in fines, say nothing in jail time, because there's a 5-year jail time for each violation. So, if she enforced that law, that law, the enforcement of that law, causes the abortion industry and all the people, all the politicians that are seeking to protect the abortion industry to fear down to their boots. I mean, they are shaking in their boots right now.
All right, we're just about out of time. I did want to do 2 points real quick. The first one was that I did clip a section of a report on that report about chemical abortions. 865,727 prescribed mifepristone abortions from 2017 to 2023 found that 10.93% of women experienced sepsis, infection, hemorrhaging, and other serious adverse events within 45 days that required them to go to an emergency room. So it's a huge problem. It's terribly underreported. And then the other thing I wanted to say that you made me think of, and I always try to find these little tidbits inside things that I can talk about, because everybody talks about every story on the planet, and the only way anybody's going to read yours is if it's a little different. And this just popped into my head. So I've read reportedly many times, like you said, that mifepristone is supposed to be as safe as Tylenol. And I watch a lot of procedurals, cop shows and medical shows and stuff like that with emergency rooms. And it struck me that I can't recall how many times I have heard some ER doctor on a TV show talk about how many people overdose on Tylenol. And I'm like, that's why they're saying it. Mifepristone. That's it. That's the messaging. And I was like, I was like, ding. So thank you for that. I think that's it. I think we ran out of time. So Jim Haren from CompassCare, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Rock Talk.